In the year 1215, at a meadow called Runnymede, King John of England was forced to affix his seal to a document that would become one of the most important in constitutional history, the Magna Carta. It was a peace treaty, a list of demands from powerful barons who had grown tired of a monarch who ruled without counsel, levied taxes at will, and used justice as a personal weapon. For the first time in English history, a king was forced to recognize that his powers had limits, that even the crown was subject to the law. John was remembered less for his accomplishments and more for his failures, rebellions, and conflicts. But who was King John, and how did his reign spiral into crisis? John was born on December 24, 1166 at Beaumont Palace in Oxford, England. He was the youngest of 5 legitimate sons of King Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful and influential women of her time. Being the youngest son of a powerful king was a complicated position. Unlike his elder brothers, Henry the Young King, Richard, Geoffrey, and William, John was not expected to inherit much. His father famously gave him the nickname Lackland, or sans terre in French, because he was left without major titles or land holdings, while his brothers were granted duchies and territories across England and France. Despite being overlooked in land and inheritance, John was not neglected in education. He received a strong formal education and was trained in administration, law, and statecraft, the intellectual tools of kingship. In 1177, when John was about 11 years old, his father appointed him Lord of Ireland, a newly conquered territory still largely controlled by native Irish kings and Norman barons. It was Henry's attempt to give his youngest son a domain of his own. John visited Ireland in 1185 to assert his authority. But his campaign was a disaster. Young and arrogant, he offended the local lords, mocked Irish customs, and failed to establish firm control. After only a few months, John returned to England in humiliation. As John came of age, his father's empire, the vast Angevin lands stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees, began to unravel under the weight of internal conflict. Henry II's sons repeatedly rebelled, often allying with the King of France. The Plantagenet civil wars were driven by personal ambition, maternal influence, and Henry II's refusal to clearly divide power among his heirs. John's loyalties shifted as power changed hands. He supported his father against his brothers at times, and later turned on Henry to align with his surviving brother Richard in a final act of betrayal that broke the old king's heart shortly before his death in 1189. After the death of Henry II, John's elder brother Richard I, better known as Richard the Lionheart, ascended the throne. A seasoned warrior and famed crusader, Richard wasted no time in preparing for the Third Crusade, departing for the Holy Land in 1190. Before leaving, Richard made arrangements for the stability of his kingdom. He named William Longchamp, the Bishop of Ely, as justiciar to govern in his absence, and notably excluded John from succession, instructing him to stay out of England for 3 years. But John had no intention of obeying. As soon as Richard departed, John returned to England and began building support among the nobility and clergy. He positioned himself as a potential ruler in his brother's absence, exploiting Longchamp's unpopularity and consolidating power in the royal court. The situation escalated in 1192, when Richard, returning from the crusade, was captured by Leopold of Austria and handed over to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI. John saw this as an opportunity to claim the crown. He offered to pay Emperor Henry to keep Richard imprisoned and even attempted to seize the English throne with support from King Philip II of France. But his efforts failed. Despite John's treachery, Richard was eventually ransomed in 1194, and he returned to England. Richard forgave John, at least publicly. He called him a child who has had bad advisors and allowed him to retain some lands, but their relationship never fully recovered. Richard did not trust John with military or political authority again. Instead, Richard spent the last years of his reign focusing on defending the Angevin territories in France. John played a minor role in those efforts until Richard's sudden death in 1199 from an arrow wound during a siege in Chalus, France. With Richard dead and no direct heir, the question of succession returned, and John finally saw his chance. On May 27, 1199, John was crowned King of England. At the age of 32, he finally stepped into the role he had long pursued. But his reign began under a cloud of uncertainty. The Angevin Empire was vast. Much of it depended not on English law or administration, but on loyalty and personal bonds. And many of those bonds were already beginning to break. John's claim to the throne was supported in England and Normandy, where the principle of adult succession was favoured. But in Anjou, Maine, and Brittany, many nobles supported Arthur of Brittany, the teenage son of John's older brother Geoffrey. Arthur had the backing of King Philip II of France, who saw in him a way to break the Plantagenet grip on France. In May 1200, John met Philip at Goulet, and a peace treaty was signed. John paid a large sum to the French king and was recognized as the rightful heir to Richard's continental lands. In return, he surrendered claims over several territories and performed homage to Philip, acknowledging him as overlord of his French domains. In the same year, John made a personal decision with far-reaching political consequences. He annulled his first marriage to Isabella of Gloucester, citing consanguinity, and instead married Isabella of Angoulême, the 12-year-old daughter of a prominent noble in southwestern France. The marriage was politically motivated. Angoulême was a strategic region, but it backfired. Isabella had already been betrothed to Hugh of Lusignan, a powerful Poitevin noble. John's abrupt interference and refusal to compensate Hugh sparked outrage in the region. The Lusignans appealed to King Philip II of France, claiming John had violated feudal custom. Philip summoned John to appear before his court in 1202, not as King of England, but as Duke of Normandy, a vassal of the French crown. John refused. In retaliation, Philip declared John's French lands forfeit and recognized Arthur of Brittany as the rightful Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. War broke out. Arthur, now 15, led an invasion alongside the French king and attacked Poitou, a region loyal to John. But in July 1202, John's forces captured Arthur and many of his key supporters during the Battle of Mirebeau, a rare military success for the English king. Arthur was imprisoned, first at Falaise, then at Rouen. His fate remains one of the enduring mysteries of medieval history. Most chroniclers agree he was likely murdered, possibly by John himself or on his direct orders. Arthur's death turned John from a rival into a tyrant in the eyes of many in France. His reputation among the barons, already damaged, was now irreparably broken. Philip II used Arthur's disappearance to rally opposition across the Angevin territories. Over the next year, French forces seized Anjou, Maine, and Touraine. Key fortresses surrendered, some without a fight. In December 1203, John abandoned the Duchy of Normandy, crossing back to England. By August 1204, the historic duchy held by English kings since William the Conqueror fell to the French crown. It was a devastating blow. John had lost almost all of his continental holdings, save for Gascony and parts of Aquitaine. The Angevin Empire, built over generations, was gone in just 5 years. To reclaim these lost lands and reassert his authority, John needed money, vast amounts of it. But with fewer territories to draw income from, John turned to England and ruled it with a heavy hand. John imposed unprecedented levels of taxation. He introduced new fines, arbitrary fees, and scutage, a payment made by barons in lieu of military service. While scutage was not new, John used it far more aggressively than his predecessors. Between 1204 and 1214, scutage was levied at least 11 times, creating resentment among nobles who had once supported him. In 1205, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the most senior church position in England, died. The monks of Canterbury secretly elected their own candidate, while King John insisted on appointing another. When both sides appealed to Pope Innocent III, the Pope rejected both candidates and appointed Stephen Langton, a respected scholar. John refused to accept Langton. He saw the appointment as an insult to his authority and a challenge to royal control of the English Church. In response, Pope Innocent III placed England under interdict in 1208, a severe punishment that suspended all church services, sacraments, and burials. For 6 years, the bells of England were silent. Churches were closed, weddings and baptisms went uncelebrated. John retaliated by seizing church lands and wealth, treating bishops and clergy as enemies. But as the standoff dragged on, his position weakened. The excommunication of the king in 1209 further isolated him in Europe and at home. By 1210, John ruled a kingdom increasingly held together by fear, not loyalty. His trusted officials such as Peter de Roche and Geoffrey Fitzpeter helped centralize royal power but alienated the barons. In 1212, after nearly 6 years of conflict, John suddenly reversed course. He submitted to Pope Innocent III, accepting Stephen Langton as archbishop and surrendering the Kingdom of England to the papacy as a papal fief. In return, John was restored to the church, and England was protected from potential invasion, especially from Philip II of France, who had threatened to depose him. In 1214, King John made his final attempt to recover his lost continental empire. With the church now backing him and new taxes collected from his English subjects, John launched a two-pronged military campaign against King Philip II of France. John personally led forces through Poitou in the south, while his allies, including his nephew Otto IV, Holy Roman Emperor, advanced from the north. But coordination failed, and the consequences were disastrous. On July 27, 1214, the French army under King Philip II crushed John's allies at the Battle of Bouvines. Otto IV was defeated and forced to flee. John's northern coalition collapsed. Meanwhile, John's southern campaign stalled. With no support from his allies and little trust among his Poitevin subjects, he withdrew back to England in failure. The loss at Bouvines destroyed John's hopes of regaining Normandy. But worse still, it shattered his authority at home. Years of taxation, arbitrary justice, heavy-handed rule and failed war had exhausted the patience of England's nobility. Many barons had paid scutage for a war they saw as futile. Some had even been punished for refusing to fight. In early 1215, the rebel barons demanded that John agree to a Charter of Liberties, a document that would limit royal power and protect the rights of the nobility and the church. John refused. In May, the barons renounced their fealty to the king and declared open rebellion. They seized London, the capital, without resistance. With support from townsmen, clerics, and many in the church, the rebel cause grew. John, realizing the threat to his throne, agreed to negotiate. In June 1215, King John met the rebel barons at Runnymede, a meadow along the River Thames. On June 15th, the parties reached an agreement, a document we know today as the Magna Carta, or Great Charter. Though primarily a peace treaty between the king and his barons, the Magna Carta contained revolutionary principles. No free man shall be seized or imprisoned except by lawful judgment. Justice shall not be sold, delayed, or denied. The king is subject to the law. On June 19th, John affixed his seal to the Magna Carta. But the peace it promised was short-lived. John had no intention of honoring the agreement. He viewed it as forced upon him and appealed to his new ally, Pope Innocent III, for help. In August 1215, the Pope annulled the Magna Carta, calling it shameful and demeaning. Civil war erupted almost immediately. England descended into chaos, a period known as the First Barons' War. The rebel barons, having seized London, turned to a foreign prince for aid. They invited Prince Louis of France, the son of King Philip II, to invade England and claim the throne. John, now faced with both domestic rebellion and a foreign claimant, responded with cruelty and speed. His forces ravaged the eastern counties, sacked rebel towns, and laid waste to baronial lands in what chroniclers called his scorched earth campaign. In January 1216, Pope Innocent III declared John a crusader, placing the church's protection over him, a move meant to discourage Louis from invading. In May 1216, Prince Louis of France landed in Kent with a sizable army. Many barons swore allegiance to him, seeing him as a preferable alternative to King John. By the summer, Louis controlled London, Winchester, and much of the southeast. Nearly half of England's barons supported him. Even King Alexander II of Scotland came south to pay homage. John, meanwhile, moved restlessly across the country, avoiding direct confrontation but struggling to regain control. His power was waning, and support even among loyalists was faltering. In October 1216, while traveling through East Anglia, John's army suffered a disastrous loss. Attempting to cross the tidal estuaries of the Wash, John's baggage train filled with gold, jewels, and important documents was engulfed by the tide and lost. Shortly after, the king fell seriously ill, likely from dysentery. On the night of October 18, 1216, King John died at Newark Castle, aged 49. He was buried at Worcester Cathedral. John's 9-year-old son, Henry III, was crowned just days later. Under the guidance of William Marshal, one of the most respected knights in England, the royalist cause regained legitimacy. To win back support, Marshal reissued a revised version of the Magna Carta in Henry's name, without the most controversial clauses. Slowly the tide turned. By 1217, Prince Louis was defeated and forced to withdraw to France.